Nigeria has been thrown into mourning. Former president of Nigeria, Muhammadu Buhari, died. The former late president Muhammadu Buhari was born in 1942 and eventually died in 2015. It's been a very sad day for most Nigerians. This was a man that to some will say he embodied the ideals of honesty, integrity, and love for nationhood. Some will say Buhari wasn't materialistic. He was a man that showed love to Nigeria. He loved Nigeria and loved the poor. He always wanted to associate with the poor. And from Global TV, we hooked up, with other stations that were live in Daura, that's Katsina State, to monitor the proceedings from when the body of the former President Buhari arrived in Abuja and got to Katsina, eventually got to Daura. And we also monitored throughout the proceedings, the funeral service. Funeral was a state funeral that had a lot of dignitaries. The president of the country himself, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, was present. The vice president, Kashim Shettima, was there. The governor of Katsina State, Diko Rada, was also there, and many other dignitaries, politicians. I could also see the former Minister of Transportation who served under President Buhari, talking about the former governor of Rivers State, Chibuike Amaechi, was live and present. Many persons who came in and to show and to pay their last respects to the former president who died on Sunday in Lagos. It's been a very busy day for Nigerians, and the president, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, has declared 7 days of mourning. It started today with we having a public holiday that was declared by the president, so Nigerians were to stay home, those who couldn't go to Daura to mourn the president. And somebody made a remark earlier today before I came into the studio. The president said Abuja has been moved to Daura. It's been a sad and painful day for this young man who was born in Daura in 1942 and actually joined the Nigerian military in 1961. Joined the Nigerian military in 1961. In 1962, went to UK and was trained in the UK at the Mons Officer Cadet School in the UK, and became a second lieutenant, was commissioned as a second lieutenant in 1963. And since then, he progressed through the different ranks. Buhari was a platoon commander. He was a brigadier major general during the Biafran War, that's 1967 to 1970. And he was also a commander of the infantry divisions, different divisions in the 1970s. He was GOC, General Officer Commanding the Army Division in Jos, and also had different trainings and at different times. I remember the former spokesperson to President Buhari at the time saying that if you aggregate all of the trainings Buhari got, that was equivalent to somebody who had a master's degree. So Buhari was many things to so many persons. To some Nigerians, they see him as the last breed of Nigerians, or one Nigerian that was so impeccable. You couldn't trace any corrupt practice to this man. So many persons saw Buhari as that. Welcome. The program today is Big Talk, and my name is Ubong Osoro. And today on the program, we are going to be looking at the life and the legacy of Muhammadu Buhari, the late president of Nigeria. He was president of Nigeria from 2015, 2016, 17, 18, came back in 19, and was president 2021 and 2022. President of Nigeria for 8 years. But before then, he was also a former head of state, in Nigeria. So he is a man that was everything to everybody. Call him what you want. And that's the show, because we're going to be having analysts join us to make sense of this discussion today, as we try to unpack the man and the legacy of the former president, Muhammadu Buhari. Don't go nowhere. Let's go for a short break. And when we're back, we'll introduce to you the analysts that will be helping us make sense of this discussion. Don't go nowhere. Let's go for a short break. sad day for Nigeria as former President Muhammadu Buhari is buried in Daura. And today's edition of the program, we want to unpack the legacy of the former President Muhammadu Buhari. This is a man that contested for presidency in Nigeria in 2003, contested in 2007, and also contested in 2011. All right, for 3 times, before he eventually became president in 2015, and the rest is history. So joining us to make sense of the discussion today, we have the publicity secretary of the Action Democratic Party, ADP, Dr. Dawoop, who is joining us via Zoom to help us unpack the legacy of former President Muhammadu Buhari. Dr. Dawoop, how are you?
I'm doing well. I send my greetings to all the viewers.
So I'd like to start on a lighter note. Why are you not in Daura?
Sorry, I had some other commitments that were already foreclosed, and that made it impossible for me to be in Daura, but I have been in Daura in spirit, and I want to condole the people and the government of Nigeria, and of course Katsina State, over the passing away of an icon, a leader par excellence, late Muhammadu Buhari, the immediate past president of Nigeria. May Allah accept his soul and grant him eternal rest.
Coming from someone who is in opposition, how do you see Buhari, and who was Buhari to those in opposition?
Well, as you can see, Buhari himself is a product of opposition. He started his politics as an opposition politician, becoming the leader of the opposition before eventually clinching the presidency. So he is a product of struggle. He did not become the president on a platter of gold. He kind of paid the price, or he really walked the walk to earn the position he actually eventually won. So for me, Muhammadu Buhari, immediately he joined politics, he confirmed that with the end of the Soviet Union in the late 80s, he had become a Democrat and convinced that democracy is the only means and sustainable way of governance, having been a coupist himself. So before he died, he had already become a complete Democrat in all ramifications. And he allowed even opposition parties to exist during his tenure, and even opposition parties were registered when he was alive. So you could see the kind of the man Buhari is. Not now when we have the opposition being muzzled and is not even being allowed to survive, and yet by so-called Democrats.
All right, Doctor. Thank you for that opening thoughts there. But there are so many Nigerians, or there are some people that believe that Buhari wasn't really able to transition into being a Democrat, like you've mentioned today, because journalists, repeatedly, we had some journalists that were arrested. You know, I could go on and mention some names. You know, some journalists that came out to say the media was gag. Some media people that could also make allegations, you know, as to the extent that during 2015 to 2022, you know, they weren't able, you know, to say things they wanted to say. In fact, let me remind you, there was a time where a social micro-blogging site, you know, was totally banned in Nigeria, and people had to use VPNs and all of that to just circumvent all of that. So this is a man that you are saying that for those of you in opposition, Buhari allowed the registration of those in opposition, so he was a good man. Does it balance these two sides of the discourse?
You know, sometimes even the security around top shots of government are overzealous. And sometimes the president might not even know that some people are even under arrest, because you don't expect the president to know everything that happened in Nigeria 100%. But the key issues, the major issues, is what he focuses on. And also sometimes the security reports and information that gets to him might even be filtered. But I like one thing with Buhari: he's an ardent reader of newspapers, because he reads a lot, even up to the time he breathed his last. Most of the time when you find him at his free hours, so he reads a lot. But I think I had Femi Adesina, his special advisor, who was saying that even there was an allegation that a journalist was kicked out of the villa, and they discovered that some of these decisions were even taken without the knowledge of even the media department, and they had to call those journalists back. So I think sometimes some of these kind of things happen, but there was no way, there was nowhere that the president clearly instructed that so-so journalists should be shut out. And sometimes when media organizations, perform in excess of their limitations, the National Broadcasting Commission is there, so it doesn't have to be Buhari going to say, hey, go and do this, go and do that. The media, including your own organization, has laid code of conduct, to carry out its own activities. And if it's, goes beyond limits, sometimes the law tends to correct those who are beyond those things. So that's the way I see it.
All right, Doctor. I'd like to talk to you about what some people perceive was a selective anti-corruption, fight, especially to those of you that are in opposition. I remember people like Olisa Metu, Sambo Dasuki, and the rest of them that were at one point or the other prosecuted when Buhari was in governance. And people pointed to, or people even mentioned some members of the opposition, like Ojus or Kalu, and the rest of them, that people mentioned their names and said these guys seem to have allegations of corrupt practices, but they weren't as the law enforcement agencies seemed allegedly not to have pushed or been so interested in their cases as it was the case of those in opposition. I just gave names, were all alive when these things happened. Olisa Metu, Sambo Dasuki, and a lot of other people that were in the former opposition at that time, PDP, or will you say the former government of Goodluck Jonathan. So how do you respond to a selective prosecution of corrupt cases? Was it the fact in Buhari's government?
You see, corrupt cases are tried by different government agencies. And these government agencies, to be fair to Muhammadu Buhari, were even established before he was even elected president. The EFCC, the ICPC, the Code of Conduct had been in existence far back during the military days. All this, and even Tinubu himself, he had faced the Code of Conduct Tribunal. He had sat behind the dock and tried. So what are you going to talk about that? Are you going to say that it was selective? Even though some people will say it was selective because Tinubu then was in opposition. But you see, when the anti-corruption agencies want to do their work, whenever it has to do with an opposition, the tendency is to look at it as if there's a witch hunt, that the opposition is, the ruling party is after the opposition and all sort of things. To be very fair to Muhammadu Buhari, some of those things happen, but you cannot say that Muhammadu Buhari would direct that, go after this person simply because he's an opposition. So even as a member of his own cabinet, he had removed Babachir Lawal when he was found wanting over issues of grass cutting contract. So what are you going to say about that? Are you going to say that President Buhari was also partial when a member of his own cabinet had to be removed? There are a couple of cases like that. So I don't think it's a fair assessment to say that, and that's the way I see it.
All right,
allow
Doctor.
the law take its course.
All right, Doctor. I'd like to talk about the cases of alleged nepotism during the government of Buhari. You're from the north, so you understand where I'm coming from. A lot of people said most of the appointments was favoring those from the north as against those from the south. What do you have to say about appointments generally during the tenure and during the time of Buhari?
First of all, Ubong, you must take it that the north has a larger population than the south, even in terms of voting population. So the tendency is that when it comes to appointment, and when you are spreading appointments, it is likely that the north is likely going to have more appointees than the south, even by virtue of population and even by votes. So you could clearly understand that. And even when you talk about nepotism, I think some people misunderstand the approach and the manner of appointments by President Buhari. For example, when you look at the appointment of the Chief of Defense Staff, then it was Major General, what is from the South, I've forgotten his name. He was the Chief of Defense Staff. He did not even appoint a northerner as the Chief of Defense Staff, and at the same time appoint a Chief of Army Staff, maybe from the north at the same time. And also when you look at the appointment of the Governor of the Central Bank during Buhari's tenure, it was the South, Emefiele, was the Governor of the Central Bank. And the Minister of Finance, Shamsuna, before the previous person, was also from Kaduna. So he did not appoint the Minister of Finance from the north and the Governor of the Central Bank from the north. Unlike Tinubu, who appointed the Minister of Finance from, I'm sorry to say, even a Yoruba speaking, and also the Governor of the Central Bank, the same Yoruba speaking. So which one is more what do I call it? So I think people are not, it's like they are comparing apples to oranges, which is not supposed, which is very wrong. So when you are very fair to Buhari, you look at even the Buratai. Buratai is not a Hausa man. All right. And he was the Chief of Army Staff at one time. The Chief of Defense Staff was not even from Hausa, but he could be from the north. Unlike now where you have a concentration of one ethnic tribe that has not enabled for a good balance as most people see it. And I think this is the angle we should look at. I'm not also saying that if people are competent, they should not be appointed, but I think there must be some fair balance across the country on key strategic positions. Unlike now, when you look at the entire finance sector, it's just coming from.
One of the lingering indices or indicators or metrics during former late President Muhammadu Buhari's time in office was the issue of groups. Different groups came up. We started hearing names like herdsmen, IPOB, and the rest. But people are also asking questions. Some persons are saying that when it was a case of IPOB, we are not supporting any terror organization and all of that, that it seems the government was very fast in proscribing the group, but the case was different, as the cases of the herdsmen and all of that. So some people say, was it really bringing the country together? What are you going to say concerning Buhari's ability to be a father figure and to bring everybody to the table? I've just given some instances. You may want to say something about that.
Okay. When President Buhari came on board, he had a 3-point agenda: security, economy, and anti-corruption. In the area of security, Boko Haram had been declared a terrorist organization and is operating in the north.
So I mean, herdsmen. Herdsmen is different from Boko Haram. Herdsmen came up.
No. You see, I'm coming to that. You see, the herdsmen, tell me, are they organized? Do they have an association? Do they have a leader? They do not have. So who are you going to proscribe? But in the case of Boko Haram, they have a defined leadership, and you could go after that leadership. In the case of IPOB, they have a defined leadership, and you can go after that. Even in the case of OPC, they had a defined leadership. But in the case of the herdsmen, it's just a contaminous analogy that you cannot prescribe and say, this is the leader of herdsmen. Who is the leader of herdsmen? So who are you going to prescribe? But the activities, of course, are terrorists. So it's just like even crime itself. So I think the way people try to generalize and compare those things, I don't think they really add up. So you have to really look at the nature and the flow and the structure of each of these organizations because you could say something. And in the case of IPOB, I mean, it's an ongoing court case. We cannot say much because the accusation borders on terrorism and also on treason, So that's a different kettle of fish. And there's a defined leadership. In the case of Boko Haram, there was a defined leadership. But in the herdsmen, tell me, who is the leader of the herdsmen? So what are you going to prescribe, or what are you going to... So you just have to deal with... That is an asymmetric security challenge, where there is no organized or defined enemy that you can easily go for. But I think that is also the downside of the security challenges that President Buhari faced. He was able to curtail Boko Haram. Issues of bombings completely stopped throughout his tenure. There were no bombings. I mean, people could freely walk anywhere throughout his tenure, no threat of bombing. But of course, a new security challenge emerged in terms of the bandits, not even necessarily the headers, but because it's more of an act of banditry rather than just talking about headers and farmers clash. It was clearly a case of banditry that emerged. And I think that's, like I said, the downside of it, where even in his own states, Katsina, the Northwest, Zamfara, Sokoto, and those axes, had serious cases of banditry. So yeah. I think you can make that analogy, and I would accept that as appropriate.
All right, you've already alluded to that. There's no need of going back to make the analogy. Thank you so much, Doctor. But I'd like to ask now, Buhari has this image of integrity. He has the image of no-nonsense, incorruptible leader, and all of that. So even his critics gave it to him that he's not a materialistic person. But for those lieutenants that worked with him, we had serious cases bordering on corruption, embezzlement, right under his administration. So what are you going to talk about somebody who came with a mantra of coming to fight corruption, but the very people that worked under him engaged in corrupt practices that were so mind-blowing? For instance, the accusations about the former CBN governor you mentioned, Godwin Emefiele, bordering to billions of naira, and different other accusations like you mentioned, Babachir Lawal and all other people that served in his government. So what do you talk about a leader who says, I don't engage in corruption, but cannot hold people accountable, people who work with him that are engaging in corrupt practices?
I think immediately Buhari joined politics, he became sober and a different Buhari that was a military head of state. And also the context under which these systems of government operate, the military and the democracy, are totally different. You see, in the military regime, the central government, which is a supreme military council, has legislative powers and also executive powers. It's only the judiciary that is outside the authority of the military. But in a democracy, you have the separation of powers, the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. And you have to balance up. There are so many things that you do, you have to tarry a while when it is under democracy. The rule of law, you have to allow it to take its course. You cannot be a judge and a prosecutor in your own case, whereas it is in the military, you are a judge and you are a prosecutor in your own case. So they had legislative powers, but here it's totally different. And to be fair to Muhammadu Buhari, he did his very best. But you cannot be 100% perfect in terms of dealing with corruption, because I can tell you, it could have ended up a situation whereby he would virtually sack everybody in the government. But for him as a person, he had maintained his personal integrity and honesty. And I think that is a big credit. He wasn't materialistic. Unlike what we're having now, where so many things are happening, the president has his hands here and there.
Thank you.
Into what and what that you can mention. Honestly, I think Buhari is totally
Thank you, Doctor.
different kettle of fish.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you so much, Doctor, for your very wonderful conversation that we're having now. But before we go, because we're going to go on a short break, before we go for that break, Doctor, in one word, can you describe the late former President Muhammadu Buhari in one word, Doctor?
I will say President Muhammadu Buhari left a legacy of integrity. That's one word I would describe the
All right,
yes.
Integrity. Thank you so much.
Yes.
All right, guys, let's go for a short break, and when we're back, Big Talk continues. My name is Ubon Osara. Don't go nowhere. Welcome back. This is Big Talk on Global TV. My name is Ubong Osoro, and today on the show we are looking at the legacy of former President Muhammadu Buhari as he's laid to rest today in Daura. Global TV covered all of the proceedings, from when the body of the former president arrived Abuja and en route to Katsina, and finally getting to Daura. And we brought you reports, and we brought you, all of the coverage of the state honored, the state funeral that was given to our former presidents. Remember that Buhari died July the 13th in London, and the current president Bola Ahmed Tinubu mandated the vice president Kashim Shettima on the mission to go retrieve the body, the dead body of the late president, back to Nigeria for burial proceedings. And today, being a public holiday declared in honor of the former president who ruled Nigeria as a civilian president for 8 years and as a military leader for 3 years. Okay, so today the burial was done in Daura, and Buhari was finally laid to rest. And today on the show we are trying to uncover the legacies of this man, a man who saw it all. A military president transformed into a civilian president, a man who lived for 82 years, a man who rose to the echelons of his career, the military career. He retired from the military, came into public service as a politician, and got to the highest office in the land. We are talking about no other person than Muhammadu Buhari. So from Katsina Airport, the casket was transported to Daura, Buhari's hometown, where the funeral prayers were held at his residence. Buhari was interred at home, and we had family members. I saw the wife Aisha, I saw Yusuf, the son, and the other children, 8 children in general. All of the children were present. I saw family members. I saw a lot of dignitaries. Okay, I saw the president, but Ahmed Tinubu was there in person. The vice president Kashim Shettima. We had the chief of defense staff Christopher Musa. He was there. We saw a lot of dignitaries. We saw former Minister of Transportation Rotimi Amechi, putting on that very flowing dress, and he was there too. And many other politicians were there to pay the last respect to this colossus, a man who had seen it all. All right, and a man who was actually, some people will say he had a following that many Nigerians politicians would dream of. Buhari, from 2003, 2007, 2011, could assure you, could always bring 8 million votes or more to the pool. So he had more than 8 million people believe in him anytime he goes into an election to vote him. This is the man that we are talking about, Muhammadu Buhari. And today joining us, before now we had Dr. Sani, who is the public secretary of the African Democratic Party, ADP, join us to dissect the legacies of Buhari, looking at his legacies, especially as regards opposition politics and opposition parties. And now to help us make sense further is a man who has done so much work around media, around research, around editorial boards, and around public affairs. Public affairs analyst Jide Ojo, who's joining us on the show tonight. A very good evening to you, Jide. I like calling you Uncle Jide.
It's a pleasure. Good evening. My pleasure.
Good to see you.
Same here, my brother.
Why are you not in Daura?
Why should I be in Daura?
You need to tell us, sir. Go ahead. Why are you not there?
No, I'm also asking you, why do you think I should be in Daura?
All right, so let's go into the conversation. Who was Buhari to you?
Buhari was the disciplinarian that introduced war against indiscipline in 1984. He was very strict. In fact, he was labeled a dictatorial, an autocrat, and a military no-nonsense man. I remember I was a teenager when he was the head of state between January 1, 1984 and August 27, 1985. In fact, I finished my secondary education in 1985. So I lived through his period as head of state. But history told us this man stayed for almost 60 years of his 82 years. He was in public service, a soldier par excellence, rose to the rank of Major General before he retired. He was a military administrator of Northeast Nigeria. He was the chairman of Petroleum Trust Fund. Before then, he was Commissioner for Petroleum Resources, which is equivalent of Minister of Petroleum Resources. Among you will have expected somebody with that kind of pedigree to be a billionaire, because as a military administrator, as Minister of Petroleum Resources, and as Chairman of Petroleum Trust Fund, these are money spinner leadership positions where he could have corruptly enriched himself without anybody being the wiser. You could see, I heard you saying you saw his family members, but did you see the most modest bungalow where he was living in Daura? Did you see that? How many politicians of today will not have erected mansions in their hometown? And nobody will have been wiser. You would have begrudged him if he had a mansion of of indescribable proportion, an earthly paradise. If he had that built, you will not have begrudged him because he had it. But he is not. I remember in 2014 when he contested the last contest before his victory, he complained that 27.5 million was too high a nomination fee and expression of interest fee, and that he had to go and borrow money from bank. He had to take an overdraft to be able to pay 27.5 million. I mean, how many people who had that kind of degree will not have
we'll come to that, because this is also a man that made so many trips outside Nigeria, and we know that those trips, do not come easy. But let me draw some statistics. During former late President Muhammadu Buhari's tenure, we had two recessions. We had a recession in 2016. We had another recession in 2020. We had inflation surge, according to data, by 22%. We had the naira devalue, we had unemployment rates rising, we had national debt tripling, and we also had criticism as regards economic policy, especially fiscal policy, and the rebranding of the naira notes during his tenure. So we had all of this. We had people saying that the media, which you are a colossus, which you are one of the pathfinders, was gag at some point. We had Twitter was banned and all of this. So can we compare some of these indices, inflation, recession, corruption, allegations here and there, even among people of his cabinet? Does it show a man who was prepared for leadership?
Well, it all depends on whether you want to see the cup as being half full or half empty. Buhari was not a sole administrator, even though the buck stops at his table. And you need to understand that he was in and out of hospital, particularly during his first term in office. I recall in 2017, he spent about 6 months at a stretch in attending to his health. That was when Vice President Yemi Osinbajo was made acting president. And he has also always said he wished he were president at a younger age, when he wasn't bogged down by serious health concerns. But much as what you have highlighted was the truth about his administration, but you also need to factor and put things in context. As at the time Buhari came to power in 2015, oil prices dipped to as low as $35–40 per barrel. Unlike during the Goodluck Jonathan years, while oil prices was as high as $100 per barrel. So the economic mainstay was crude oil production and earnings. He has to do more for less. It didn't meet a robust treasury. The treasury was, to say the least, empty, and it met a lot of debt. And so, yes, the economy went into recession on 2 occasions, but it also rebounded out of recession. So it wasn't particularly the one that led the economy into recession. The indices were there from the time of Goodluck Jonathan, and it happened, and he also plowed us out of it. So what is the hue and cry? As at the time Buhari was in power, do we have double-digit inflation like the current situation where we have about 23% headline inflation? Was the naira devalued? Was anything being bought? Did we buy a liter of fuel for as high as 1,000 naira under Buhari in his 8 years? What was the exchange rate? Exchange rate under Buhari was 600 to 700 naira to a dollar. Today, we are trying to keep it at about 1,600 naira to a dollar. So, yes, we have 133 million multidimensionally poor Nigeria under him. But if the latest figure were to be released, I'm sure the situation could have been worse. Don't also forget that in 2020, barely a year after he won re-election, the entire world went into lockdown because of COVID-19. There was no production. The entire world, it was like an Armageddon has come. And here is a man who fought the situation doggedly and made sure that bodies were not being picked on the streets of Nigeria because of the ravaging effect of COVID-19. I think it deserves some credit for the way he handled COVID-19 pandemic during his tenure.
All right, so one of the major campaign pillars of former President Buhari, especially leading 2013 into 2014, one of the projections was that we are having a man who's going to help us stem corruption at the very best, if not stop corruption. Was former late President Buhari during his tenure 2015 to 2022, was he able to fight corruption decisively? That's a question that people want to know.
For the best of my knowledge, he tried his utmost best. His administration introduced whistleblower policy. His administration introduced bank verification number, which has helped in the fight against corruption. His administration passed some key legislation, anti-corruption legislation. Don't forget, under him, we were able to have better loot repatriated to this country, which were put to good use to fund some of our road infrastructure. He also ensured the signing into law of mutual legal assistance law that seeks international cooperation to retrieve proceeds of crime. In fact, there is a legislation called POCA, Proceeds of Crime Act, which he also signed into law. So in the area of anti-corruption, he did his best. So many ghost workers were weeded out of the civil service. Of course, on the flip side, Ahmed Idris that he trusted as Accountant General betrayed the trust of the people and of the president by helping himself to billions of naira in his position.
In security, I like to know your take, because also away from corruption, insecurity at the point was a big problem, 2012, 2013, and during the campaigns, people say this is a former military leader. He has the knowledge how to combat insecurity. What do you talk about the time of former President Buhari as regards his handling of the security situation in Nigeria?
Thank you. Again, I will put things in perspective. Under Goodluck Jonathan, $2.1 billion that was meant for procurement of military hardware to fight insurgency and insecurity was grossly mismanaged under the former National Security Advisor, Sambo Dasuki. Buhari set up a committee to probe the disbursement of that $2.1 billion. And it was discovered that some of that money was used for the re-election of Goodluck Jonathan, which did not come true. And, refurbished military hardware were procured. And at the end of the day, our military was starved of needed hardware to fight the insecurity. But nevertheless, his administration was able to procure arms from US, from Brazil through US. We talked about 12 Super Tucano jet fighter. And you could see, I don't know whether you watched the Borno State Governor, Professor Babagana Zulu, that he himself was in UK with his former boss, Vice President Kashim Shettima, where he said that when Buhari took over the reins of government in 2015, almost half of Borno State was under the Boko Haram insurgency. But Buhari came, relocated the military high command to Maiduguri, and they were able to push the insurgents to Sambisa and Mandara hills. So today, when last did you hear Boko Haram attack in Abuja? Before then, Boko Haram attack Abacha barracks here, attack UN building here, attack police headquarters here, attack Igbo Square. So at least from that time to date, we have not heard of any attack by the insurgent in FCT. All right. So it stands to his credit that he did his level best to push and reduce incidents of insecurity in Nigeria.
Right. I know people may want to further the conversation, but we don't have time because people will bring headers, farmers clash, banditry, and the reformation of the other, pockets of insecurity crisis that actually came up during the time. But before we go, please, would you like to describe Buhari in a sentence? Let's just hear you describe late former President Muhammadu Buhari. Jide Uju, researcher, editor, and go ahead.
I would say Buhari is a special breed. He left power in 1985, came back to power in 2015, 30 years interval. He's a man, a patriot, a professional soldier, a statesman, a very highly disciplined person. He has only one wife, and he's a man of modest means and very humble.
Very modest. Very modest. I know you would like to add that. Thank you so much, Jide Ojo,
Yes,
for coming on the
was a
show,
very
Big Talk, tonight. I hope that one of these days you will actually come to the studios. I'd like to see you around as we have discussions. Thank you so much. Jide Ojo is a researcher, is an editor, and a public affairs analyst. Thank you so much for taking our time out of your tight schedule to talk to us today. And before the show, we had Dr. Dawood Sani, who is actually the publicity secretary for the African Democratic Party, joined us, ADP. He joined us earlier on the show, to talk about the legacies of the late former president Muhammadu Buhari. And people, that's the size of our show for you tonight. I hope that you do have for yourself a wonderful evening. My name is Ubong Usara in Abuja. Bye for now.